The samurai are more than just soldiers. They're a social class. You can't just earn the position, you must be born into it. Man or woman, if you are born a samurai, you will live and die one. Since samurai were the warrior class, did that include the women as well? And for honor, the female samurai are given to us under the title of Nobushi. So who are the Nobushi? Who were they in history? What were they like? Were they as skilled or deadly as their male counterparts? Well, let's talk about it. Welcome back to another Heroes in History, where we take a look at For Honor's heroes and compare them to their historical counterparts and determine just how accurate or inaccurate they are. Nobushi's name can translate to mean field warrior, and her role, as described in her trailer, is to defend the outskirt villages of the samurai when the rest of the samurai are fighting larger battles in other places. Keep this portrayal in mind, as it will be important later. Now, I've already done a lengthy response video to Gaijin Goomba where I point out a lot of the misconceptions he makes about the Nobushi and their historical counterpart, so I think today is a good time to set the record straight on who they actually were. So who were they? The Nobushi are based off of the historical warrior women of Japan called the Onna-musha, or you could also say Onna-musha, or even Onna-bushi. They can all mean the same thing. All literally can translate to mean women warrior or warrior maiden. The role of the Onna-musha was twofold: to defend their home and to uphold their honor. This could manifest itself in times of Onna-musha having to defend their homes and villages in the event of attack, much like the Nobushi trailer describes them, but there were other situations where the female samurai would need to take up arms. Now, let's clarify a few things before we go further. Did the Onna-musha fight in battles? Yes, they did. Did they prove themselves as capable warriors alongside men? Yes. According to archaeological evidence, there are points where women did fight in battles with men. They might not have made up the brunt of the forces, and there's no real way of knowing the full effectiveness or role they might have played in the battles, but archaeological discoveries have shown definitively that women's remains were found among the men in terms of soldiers. The role of women in warfare can date as far back as the Kamakura period of Japan. In this time period, the role of a samurai wasn't yet locked. One could still advance into the position or out of the position if they wished, and samurai were still treated as soldiers primarily. During this area, we get probably the most famous legend of an Onna-musha. In the Genpei War, there's a legend of the famous Tomoe Gozen, who fought alongside her husband Minamoto no Yoshinaka against his cousin Minamoto no Yoritomo. The tale of Heiki, an epic meant to commemorate the samurai who fought in these wars, mentions how beautiful, deadly, and skilled she was. It said that in a final stand between Yoshinaka and Yoritomo, when her husband knew his end was near, he ordered his wife Tomoe to flee with her life. However, Tomoe instead climbed atop her horse and rode out to do battle with the enemy forces, killing 3 of the enemy commanders with her naginata and rallying her own forces to her side. Though the battle was lost, the legend of Tomoe lived on. Her tale is still retold to this day in plays and in some anime. Now, how factual the story of her has been debated by scholars. There are no remains of her to be found on the battlefield, and her death is not recorded anywhere. Some speculate she escaped the battlefield, or that she was eventually killed and her body burned, but even her existence has been questioned. But keep this in mind. If she did exist, her role as a general on the field of battle would indicate that some Onna-musha were present in major conflicts or battles, and may have well been respected. Not only this, but the fact that a woman warrior would have such prominent acceptance and admiration from the general public means it can't have been too uncommon for women to have warrior-like status. As time passed, however, and the samurai class and its role changed in society, so too did the role of the Onna-musha. Women still participated in wars, and there are, of course, legends of different Onna-musha in different battles, and legends of the fantastic feats they might have achieved. It was also sometimes seen to have units of warrior women rather than just a single heroic maiden, like in the case of the 200 women musketeers led by Ikeda Sen in the Battle of Shizugatake. The point is that I'm trying to make, that women did have a place on the battlefield in certain instances, and they weren't forbidden from it. The last great battle involving Onna-musha that history reveals to us was the Battle of Aizu in 1868 during the Boshin War. An Onna-musha named Nakano Takako led her small band of warrior women armed with naginatas to battle the imperial army. They were ultimately defeated, but it was reported they fought valiantly, and Takako's statue is still standing to this day in honor of her bravery and devotion to her cause. Another female warrior in the Battle of Aizu was Yamamoto Yaikou, who would go on to become a nurse in the Russo and Sino-Japanese Wars, and later opened a school for girls in Kyoto with her husband. Though she was criticized at the time for adopting American ideals and practices, including Western Christianity, she would later become a symbol of women's rights for the women's rights movements in Japan later on. So, obviously, after going through the history of it, the next question is, why haven't we heard as much about them? Some articles and spokesmen that I've listened to have argued the reason we don't hear more about the Onna-musha is because of basic sexism. And I couldn't disagree more. There are two real reasons why the Onna-musha are not as well known. For one thing, the women in these wars, though fighting in them, were not independent of their husbands, masters, or lands. I said earlier that Onna-musha fought for their honor. Well, their honor was also their husband's honor. Quite often, defending their husband's honor was even more important. You'll notice if you research these warrior women enough, they are often fighting in defensive battles to protect their lords, their fortresses, and their homes, or their lands. Even the two most legendary Onna-musha mentioned so far, Tomoe Gozen and Naka no Takako, were fighting in what could be considered defensive engagements. Tomoe was making a valiant last stand, and Nakano was fighting to defend her samurai way of life in the Boshin War. In some cases, they are on the offensive, but it's not as often, and the reason for this is because of the primary role of the women samurai: to defend the home and to defend the honor of their husband and lord. Don't take this as me saying a woman's place is in the home either, because the role of an Onna-musha played is actually quite romantic, if you give it some thought, of course. In most medieval stories in the West, we see the brave hero stand his ground against the enemy while he buys time for the women and children to flee. But for a samurai, death was preferable to dishonor, to disloyalty. A wife was expected to die with her husband and to stand by him in life and in death. Many samurai women were trained in tanto jutsu, the art of fighting with a dagger. They often carried daggers beneath their kimonos so that, in the event of attack, they can fight with it. But also in the event of their inevitable defeat or either husband's death, they can take their own life. It may seem bizarre and cruel, but dying with your husband and your honor was seen as a high honor and was seen as the final great act of loyalty. That is why samurai women would fight, because to fight for your men and to die with them in battle was a way to show that loyalty. The second reason you don't hear as much about them is because of what happened during the Edo period. Frankly, the Sengoku period is swamped with so many names of leaders and daimyo that we don't think about the various samurai under them. We all know Oda Nobunaga, for example, but do you know any of the major samurai who served under him without looking them up? It's not sexism, it's just we don't know all of them that well. We don't know all the different individuals under Oda Nobunaga. We just know him, because they are an extension of his honor and his will, much like the women were. But in the Edo period, the roles changed. In a time of relative peace, the need for soldiers and women soldiers was much less extreme. Samurai became almost strictly a social class rather than soldiers. Their codes of conduct began to reflect the codes of chivalry we see in knights, as the samurai now had the luxury to redefine their purpose. It was less about battlefield honors and more about social and loyalty honors. Women, therefore, were now more relegated to the role of manager of home affairs. The samurai women still had rights and privileges, though, don't let that be overlooked. And they were still higher up in status than peasant women, but they no longer were needed to be soldiers. They were trained to fight, trained to battle, trained to die if necessary, but it was rare that they would be needed to. Okay, so I've gone on and on about the Onna-musha. How does Nobushi from For Honor match up to them? Is she like the Onna-musha? Well, yes. Firstly, her weapon is very fitting. The Onna-musha were specifically trained in the naginata, to the point that it's become the stereotypical weapon for them. This weapon granted the woman a longer reach and versatility of slashing and stabbing at range, helping to negate the disadvantage in size and strength. In real combat, the naginata was able to provide sweeping and thrusting techniques that could maintain a good distance, while also being lethal, and it provided a small degree of armor penetration if precise enough. The greatest benefit of all, though, is the lightweight nature of the weapon. As with most pole arms, weight is an issue. The naginata is rather lightweight and easy to maneuver, making it ideal for women who might not have the upper body strength to handle heavier weaponry. That's not to say women weren't trained in other weapons, of course. Onna-musha were likely taught the art of the sword and bow as well, but the naginata has been the historical and stereotypical callback weapon of the Onna-musha. The clothing she's wearing is lacking in armor to imply that the Nobushi are more like Minutemen. They're just ordinary citizens who will take up arms in the event of an emergency. And while that is what some Onna-musha might have been required to do, some did have standard armor or some kind of protection that they might wear. The Nobushi has recently seen a few changes in For Honor, and for this I'm very grateful. It's wonderful to have this character in For Honor's roster bring some recognition to the Onna-musha and the magnificent legacy they provided. I don't agree with everything he said in his video, but if there's one thing I do agree with, Gaijin Gunbu was right when he said that these warrior women deserve some recognition. And Nobushi does provide it in a huge way. She's definitely a great representation of the warrior maidens she's inspired by. Thank y'all for watching this episode of Heroes in History, and I will see you in my next video.